Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back to Conservative Commandos radio show with Sharon Angle, Rick Trader, and yours truly, Anna Little. If you would like to hear a rebroadcast of today's show, please check out our websites, CCRS Network and ccrshow.com. Also, please like us, friend us, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Sharon Angle, our next guest, is with us, and the honor of the introduction is yours.
And it truly is an honor on this 4th of July to introduce someone who has probably given more than many Americans have just for freedom. And that's Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who is a fellow and military expert with defense priorities. Lieutenant Colonel Davis retired from the U.S. Army as a lieutenant colonel after 21 years of active service and currently serves as a defense fellow and military expert for defense priorities. He was deployed into combat zones 4 times in his career, beginning with Operation Desert Storm in 1991 and then to Iraq in 2009 and Afghanistan twice. He was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for Valor at the Battle of 73 Easting and awarded a Bronze Star Medal in Afghanistan. His work on defense, foreign affairs, and social issues has been published in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, CNN, The Guardian, U.S. News and World Report, Time, Politico, and other publications. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, welcome to Conservative Commandos radio show.
Always my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure, especially on Independence Day. I can't help but think about all those places where you've done interviews. It doesn't seem to be right or left. It's all across the board. Everyone loves someone who has given so much for their country. I just want to thank you, first of all, for that. It's nice to have people who really regard the United States of America as the greatest nation in the world and are willing to sacrifice so much. Thank you so much for being such a symbol or an example, I guess, better said, an example of patriotism. Thank you.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. Thank you very much. It is indeed my pleasure and honor to serve the country as I have, and it's something I'll treasure with all my heart.
That's an interesting word, treasure, when it comes to military service. Thank you for saying that. I want to talk to you a little bit first about defense priorities. Tell us just about your mission and where we can find defense priorities, because it seems like more and more as President Trump begins to make America great again, we get more and more of a focus on the world and what's going on in the world. And that seems to be kind of where defense priorities is.
Yeah, it really is. And I'll just tell you, it's I think I was actually the first or maybe the second full-time employee of the organization. So it's fairly new. And when I first joined in 2015, I actually thought that I was just kind of a lone voice out there in the wilderness and that there weren't many others because, Washington foreign policy establishment has just been kind of settled into, whether on the right or the left, it seems like the idea is military options first and then diplomacy if that doesn't work, and that's the exact opposite of the way our Constitution was written and our character, I think, is developed, whereas we have always from the very beginning, and for very good reason, had a strong national defense, but we've also had, I think, a pretty responsible and sane foreign policy for the most part, and I just kind of felt like that we were going too far in the direction of a primacy of the military power over diplomacy. And then when I heard that the formation of this organization, Defense Priorities, was a strong advocate of strong national defense, but of a restrained foreign policy, of something that was rational, something that would work towards America's benefit, that did not use, the thought of military force as the first course of action. And so that's why I've been very pleased to be a part of it. And I think we're starting to grow in our influence, and we're discovering that there's actually a lot of people who have that same view, who think that, all this nation building stuff. And again, this was, Obama and Bush and a lot of this kind of thing. It almost didn't even matter left or right. but it was just this mentality in Washington that like, oh, we have to do this. But it has failed so many times to accomplish good things for America. And so that's one of the reasons why, frankly, I voted for Trump, because he was the opposite of his opponent there, who seemed to be all about nation building and getting involved everywhere. And I've been encouraged by some of the things that he's been saying, especially with, saying, hey, I want to get troops out of Syria, questioning whether we should, leave troops in Afghanistan, even after, his original concept about staying there a little bit longer. But still he's saying, but I still think that we need to get the troops out of there because that's what makes sense for the country. And so we're supporting the president everywhere he talks about doing something that makes sense like that. And, and our fellows have been getting more airtime, like on Fox News, on some of the bigger publications, even the Washington Post and New York Times on occasion. So more people, I think, are starting to get some traction on what defense priorities is all about.
And it is a great website. I'm over here on your website right now looking at how current it is. You have an article here, after the summit, what's next? Regardless, Trump will declare the summit a success, and the Trump-Kim summit might not accomplish much, and that's okay. Let's talk about all this Trump-Kim summit. Give me your take.
Sure. Yeah, I think, and as ironically, I actually just sat down with a diplomat from the South Korean embassy here in Washington yesterday, had a long conversation with what they thought about it. And I think that to a large degree, two countries are aligned on what the expectations are. And, just look, the fact of the matter is, I wish Trump would be a little more diplomatic in the way he does some of these things. He makes a lot of people angry, I think, unnecessarily sometimes. But when you look at the substance of what he does, especially in some of these areas, he's doing a really good job, I think. For example, in this summit, which was following the Moon-Kim summit in April, the idea that you're going to solve this and have a concrete plan on one meeting was always unrealistic. And I mean, that's like saying, hey, Roger Goodell met with the NFL Players Association representative and they didn't come out with an ironclad agreement. I mean, what's wrong? Well, it ended up taking 18 months for them to work out the last players negotiation. And that's just something, that has to do with, the labor negotiations. We're talking about global war and peace, possibilities of nuclear war, and that's not going to get solved in one day. But I think they did have a really good beginning. They established rapport, and that's absolutely crucial, because if you're going to get Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear weapons or in any capacity diminish his own internal ability to deter aggression, you have to establish trust. And you're not going to do that if all you do is threaten destruction on the other side. And so I think Trump has been really good about he's giving credit where credit is due. But now you also hear Pompeo in the next couple of days is going to be heading back to Pyongyang for the express purpose of saying, all right, now then it's time to start coming up with a roadmap that's going to say, hey, what are your objectives? What are the concrete things you're willing to do? And what is the timeline we're going to get it done in? So now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty, the hard work. And the Trump administration is right on track with going down that road.
So with all that said, this has been then a really good thing for America to open up and begin to talk with Korea. Is that your take on it? Because I know it was both sides were saying, we're not so sure this is a great idea.
Yeah, and I have been for a long time been saying, we need to talk more to them. And that was one of the criticisms I had of the previous two administrations, frankly, that, we'd say, oh, well, we're not willing to talk to them because we don't want to give them credibility or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, how can you ever solve something if you don't talk person to person? I mean, look at Reagan. I mean, Reagan was talking to Gorbachev, the head of the very evil empire, as we called it. Yet there he is talking to him. And that's the case, anytime you want to get something done, you have to be able to talk to somebody, whether you like them or not, whether you think they're an evil regime or not. The fact of the matter is that is the regime that's in charge, and we have to work out some kind of an agreement that works out for the benefit of the United States, and ideally that, is something that's mutually beneficial, because they have to have some reason to want to enter into it. So if you're not talking to, other regimes or anybody that's not your best friend, then you're not going to get a lot done in international affairs. And I think we've seen that over the last several decades And I'm hopeful that, Trump can make that a change on that.
Well, I am too. And we're right up against a break right now. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, we've been talking with him about the summit with Kim Jong-un of Korea. And I know on the other side, my co-host, the one and only Anna Little, will want to talk to you a little bit about Putin, because he's one of those regime leaders as well that Trump has been criticized for meeting with. And also, I know I'm very curious, and I'm hoping Anna's going to talk to you about the money. It just seems like the defense money always gets put on the back burner and possibly isn't spent exactly the way it needs to be spent for the best of our troops. And so we're looking forward to the rest of this interview. Can you stay with us through this short break?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. As I said, we're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis on this Independence Day, and we're coming to you from the Conservative Commandos Radio Network studios and around the world on the internet with TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, American Political Radio, Leading Edge Radio Network, and AM/FM 24/7. We'll be right back after these messages with my co-host, Anna Little, and I'm Sharon Engel.
The Conservative Commandos Radio Show is the commander of the Conservative Commandos Radio Network. We've established a front line of conservative leaders and ironclad patriots to revive the promise of America.
There must be some kind of way out of here.
We patriots have succeeded in securing the next 4 years of American prosperity, sovereignty, and liberty under President Donald Trump. But the fight is never over, and we must be forever vigilant.
Drink my wine.
Do you have a passion for American values? Do you believe in preserving the American dream? If so, listen to the Conservative Commandos Radio Network or around the world on the internet at ccrshow.com and ccrsnetwork.com. Check out our websites for rebroadcasts and network updates. We are the Conservative Commandos Radio Network, where even more newsmakers go to be heard.
This is J.D. Manier, co-host on the Conservative Commandos radio show. Are you among the millions of Americans who feel uncertain when it comes to their health care? We're happy to inform you that there is a solution, and that solution is Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of like-minded people that work together to pay for their medical costs. There are no networks, so you get to choose your doctor and hospital. Liberty Health Share allows you to easily decide how, when, and where you will access health care. It could be the best practical, moral, and economical choice for you and your family, starting at $107 a month for a single, up to $449 a month for a family. That's mom, dad, and all kids. This is the way healthcare should be. For more information, call 855-585-4237 or visit libertyhealthshare.org. That's libertyhealthshare.org and regain control over your healthcare costs. Together, we're changing healthcare for good.
From the East Coast to the West Coast and around the world on the internet, we're coming to you live from the CCRS studios. This is the Conservative Commandos Radio Show with your host, Rick Trader. The Conservative Commandos Radio Show, where the newsmakers go to be heard.
Businessman there, drink my wine.
This is Congressman Alan West, and you're listening to the Conservative Commando Radio Show.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Conservative Commandos Radio Show with Anna Little, Sharon Engel, Rick Trader. And this segment, we're speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, fellow and military expert with defense priorities. Lieutenant Colonel Davis, thank you so much for waiting through that break. We do appreciate your time.
It's always a pleasure to be here, really.
Well, I've enjoyed very much listening to you and Sharon Angle speaking in the first segment of this interview. And I've got some questions, as Sharon intimated, about the relationship with our president, Donald Trump, and Vladimir Putin. Now, there is a talk of a Trump-Putin summit, and we're wondering whether this is good for America. I also wonder whether this Trump-Putin summit might help us in strategy in Syria. I know we've been kind of militarily bumping into each other a little bit. Perhaps you can help us in addressing those two questions.
Yeah, these just in terms of the summit itself, I mean, I could not be more supportive of it because, again, nobody benefits from an antagonistic relationship between the United States and Russia in our country. What we need to do in any kind of foreign policy and negotiations or discussions or interactions with every other country is to minimize any disruptions or any difficulties we may have with, and certainly lower any potential for conflict with our adversaries and enhance our relations with our allies and our friends and strengthen those, because everything we do, we want it to be good for the United States, the people of our country. And so I think that President Trump reaching out to Putin is an important thing to do, because there are some areas where we have common cause, like there could be in Syria with anti-ISIS operations. And so we want to use those to the maximum extent we can. As Secretary of State Pompeo himself said, I believe about 10 days ago, he said, everywhere we have common cause, let's work toward that. But anywhere we don't have common cause, anywhere that American interests diverge from Russia, then we'll stand firm on making sure that our interests are always taken care of. And I think that's the right path, is that where you can work together and you can, say, hey, look, we both have common cause here, even though we have differences here. Let's work together here to get for the common good. That creates goodwill. It also creates a little bit of trust. And then on those areas where they're doing things that are in opposition to us or that don't work to our advantage, then we stand firm on that. We say, hey, look, here's the bottom line. We have to have this kind of behavior, this kind of action, or we're not going to tolerate something that goes, counter or against our people. And we may take specific actions here and there, but we don't want to, because we want to maintain cordial relations. And you can't do that if you don't have some kind of a relationship. So the fact that Pompeo has talked to Sergei Lavrov, for example, their foreign minister, and now Trump is hopefully going to meet with Putin later this month. And I just think that has a lot of positive potential for the country.
Well, I hope you're right, because I have to say, I don't trust Vladimir Putin at all. I think he says one thing and does another. I think he is not acknowledging or he's not accountable for behavior that I consider to be criminal against his own people. So I don't trust this man. And I think that his dealings in the Middle East, in some cases, have not necessarily coordinated with ours. Now, I'm not a military expert. I'm certainly not an expert on foreign policy. So I'm hopeful that your positive position with regard to this is going to outweigh my fears. And I think that I'm not alone among American people who are uncomfortable.
Oh, no. Yeah, and let me just tell you, I'm right there with you. I mean, I don't trust the guy at all. In fact, if you want to use the word trust, I trust him to do what's in his best interest at all times, to include saying whatever he thinks he needs to that's going to improve him, which may not at all be what the truth is. But that's one of the reasons why I just reinforce why the talking is an important thing, because part of what you communicate, especially off camera and away from the microphone when it's just private, is that, when you can actually say, look, man, you're saying this stuff here and you and I both know that's a bunch of crap, and we're not going to tolerate that here. So let's make sure we're clear on the consequences if you do whatever is not in our interest or opposed to our interest. And then you can put as good a diplomatic face on that as you want to, but you don't trust, just take somebody at their word. I mean, that would be crazy, because, it would be in our bad result if we did that. But if you can build a little bit of confidence, even if you don't like someone, or even if you don't trust them, to do what they're going to say, but you can trust them to do what's in their interest. And if you can come up with a good enough relationship, especially behind the scenes, then you can come to an accommodation. And so you don't have to trust them. But if you could come up with a win-win situation where their interests are taken care of to the extent that they're acceptable, and we can get them to do what we want that's acceptable, then ultimately that's a win for the American people.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears, I hope that we're on the right track there. And I do agree, you've got to talk to people. I heard you make that point earlier in the interview. And if you're not talking, you've got a problem. So I agree that there needs to be some communication there. Now, Sharon also brought up the issue of defense spending and, budgets and whatnot. And I wondered what position you have on that. I personally believe that we have to give our men and women in harm's way every piece of equipment they need to be effective and to protect themselves and to carry out their mission. So in the area of where we're in combat and we have military personnel in harm's way, they need to have whatever they need. But then back stateside, I wonder sometimes if there aren't places we can't cut. And I certainly want our fleets to be at the ready, both air fleets and those on the sea. I want to make sure we have the equipment that we need. And I think most Americans would agree with me on those priorities. Where is it that we could cut in defense spending if we can? And, how could we give some of that relief to the American taxpayer who still is struggling, even though Trump seems to have stimulated the economy somewhat?
Yeah, I think you've hit the key points right square on the head, and it's something that I've been advocating even long before I joined Defense Priorities, and our organization in particular. I mean, the very name of it, Defense Priorities, is what we advocate. You have to set priorities. You can't do everything that you want everywhere all the time because we have limited resources, and we have a federal budget that we have to make hard decisions about what we do and what we don't do with our money, because spending in one way means you're not going to spend in another, or that you're going to go further in debt, and you can't do that for very long without causing problems. So the last tour I went to Afghanistan in 2011 was as the Rapid Equipping Force team chief for Afghanistan, and the very purpose of that mission was to find out exactly what troops needed to make absolutely sure that they had everything they needed in combat. So that is almost like an article of faith that we absolutely will do whatever is necessary to get our troops the training and the equipment that they need to do the job that we send them into combat. Now, there's two critical points that go along with that, because it's also got to be responsible spending. So the first point is, frankly, a lot of the problem that we've had in some readiness and stuff is not because Congress hasn't allocated enough money, but because we have been using those troops everywhere, all over the world, in all these different missions, many of which, quite frankly, are marginal at most, working towards American interest. And I think we cut some of those back, and that by itself will make the force more ready and save money. For example, in Syria, we have 2,000 troops on the ground there, which frankly do not improve American national security at all any longer. So they need to be withdrawn. You can certainly make a case that the mission in Afghanistan could be reformed and either completely ended or changed in nature, because it's just not working. And so let's don't spend a lot of money and disperse our troops all over the globe for missions that may not even affect our national security at the expense of making us ready to face potentially existential fights we may have later on, like with North Korea or, God forbid, Iran or Russia or China. Those are the things that we need to really put our focus on. The last point on this, I would say, is we have got to do a lot better job in acquisition and how we, get new equipment, how we develop new organizations for combat, because we spend way too much money and have just squandered tens of billions over the last 2 years in programs that really, it was pretty clear they weren't going to succeed, but we didn't recognize it early enough, and we continued to spend the money and lost it. We've got to do a better job with that.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you today on Conservative Commandos Radio Show. Quickly remind our listeners where they can find more information about you and defense priorities.
Yes, I'd be honored if anybody'd like to check out all my work on television and places and radio like this, and articles that I publish is on my Twitter account at Daniel L. Davis 1, the number 1. And then we also have, as you were talking about there on our organization homepage, defensepriorities.org, where we have not just mine work, but a lot of our other quality fellows and other people we have working with us. You can read our stuff there.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Thanks so much. Happy 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. God bless America. And come back and see us again soon.
I look forward to it. And same to you.
And listeners, that was Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He's a fellow and military expert with Defense Priorities. I'm Anna Little, co-hosting today with Sharon Engel and producer Rick Trader, and we're coming to you from the Conservative Commandos Radio Network studios and around the world on the internet with TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, American Political Radio, Leading Edge Radio Network, and AM/FM 24/7. We'll be right back with you after this break. Don't go away.